Good evening. Welcome to our second third Thursday, if you want to call it that, and our second Living Books evening. And as many of you know, what we're trying to do is to bring in members of the community every third Thursday of the month to speak about their lives, past and present, and from different areas of the community. And anybody who would like to talk, please let us know. We'd love to hear your stories. Anne is a long time resident of Grand Forks area. In 1942, I think we arrived here. Her husband Cecil was born here, so they've known the area for their lives. And Anne's a poet, a writer, and is going to speak about her writings, but also about the Doukhobor community and the history of the Doukhobor community in Grand Forks. So, welcome, Anne, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for coming. We discussed this earlier with Ken before we came, and he thinks it's a good idea because even some of the people here with the Doukhobor background, I would really like. I have always had a problem with the people understood what Doukhobor meant. And so I decided I want to start my talk. I'm not going to go much into the history, but I will talk about what does the Doukhobor name stand for. First of all, I don't think it's properly translated, because in fact it means spirit wrestler. And in Russian it's Doukhobor, and then somewhere in the whole process it's become what it's become, Doukhobor. And it's often misunderstood and often misused and even sometimes abused. And it's always been my concern. And so in this we did a historical pageant in 1987, and there's a little paragraph here that I would like to share with you all, explaining exactly how did we end up being called Doukhobors. This group of Russian peasants had received the name of ikonoborцы, or icon wrestlers, for rebelling against the icon worship of the church. The ikonoborцы were being severely punished, and their persecution often resulted in death. In that year of 1785, it's a long time ago, the Archbishop Ambrosius of the Russian Orthodox Church renamed them as Doukhobor, meaning spirit wrestlers, because he said they were wrestling against the Spirit of God and should be shamed and classed them as heretics. The spirit wrestlers, or the Doukhobor, accepted their name proudly, agreeing that yes, they did indeed wrestle against injustice and evil, using only the spiritual force of love and forgiveness. So Doukhobor is not a religion, it is not a nationality, it is a faith and a way of life, based on the teachings of Jesus Christ our Lord. That to me has always been, because I think, and the Doukhobor, the spirit wrestler's basic faith has its principles, but it's all based, of course, on the teachings of Jesus Christ, but it's all very much peaceful, and it's occasionally it has been used in different, and sometimes even our youth many times did not want to be called a Doukhobor. So I thought I'd explain that even those that are of Doukhobor background here, there's a lot of us. I'm just wondering how many were aware of that. I wasn't, I guess, until I started digging through in writing the Doukhobor pageant and for the production. I did go through an awful lot of history. Anyway, now I will start, I don't know where to begin, so I'll start from the beginning, which is probably close to time when I was born, which was very close to the time Columbus discovered America, I guess. Anyways, I have notes because I'm an elderly person. I have my moments. So I thought I would keep a little bit here, keep myself a little bit of prompting. I was born into a Doukhobor family in 1934 in Buchanan, Saskatchewan. The Christian Community of Universal Brotherhood, CCUB, as it was called for short, was still functioning. And my father was asked to leave his farm, his family farm, or his family in where his brothers and sisters and mother and dad lived, in Bergen, and he took his family to Buchanan. And that is where I was born. And my grandmother was brought in. She was a midwife. As a matter of fact, in her memory, I will say that she delivered approximately 80 babies, never lost a mother or a child. When I was born, according to my mom, I was slightly premature. And weighed only about 5 pounds. My poor grandmother looked at me and said to my mother and dad, not a thing will come of her. She's way too small. At the time, of course, because I guess I was slightly privy, my mother didn't have the milk to feed me, so my very capable grandmother baked an apple, and I have my sister here to prove it, by the way, put it in a cheesecloth, and I sucked it dry. Wow. I think my mother says by 6 weeks I had tripled my weight. Anyway, that was my humble beginning. At 3.5 years, I was about 3.5 years, I think, when we left Buchanan back to Saskatchewan. And it was to Bergen, sorry, back to Bergen, Saskatchewan. Thank you. And I was the youngest of the whole family, but we lived in the yard with my grandparents and my uncles and aunties and all my cousins. It was an excellent place to spend my growing up years. There was colts and cows and kittens and puppies and just it's a wonderful way to spend my childhood. And I'm going to share with you a poem that I had written describing our life there in Saskatchewan in those early years. It's from my book, and it's called Down Memory Lane. I walk down memory lane today over paths that once were mine. How great to see the favorite nooks back through the years of time. I wandered through the meadows where many flowers grew, lady slippers around my feet and bells of azure blue. I saw the country schoolhouse there standing in the grove, roamed through country roads again where horse and buggy drove. Our little house was standing there beside the water well. Far in a distant pasture I heard a cattle bell. Fields of grain swayed in the breeze like seas of green and gold. The groves of birch and silver leaves stood as in days of old. I found the little robin's nest among the branches still, and mother sheep and baby lambs were grazing on the hill. While roses crisp with morning dew still lined the paths I trod, I rested neath the poplar trees among the warm, damp sod. We laid to bridge the old horse team and took a wagon ride along familiar roads and lanes, my parents by my side. At night I sat on Granddad's knee, dreaming while he read, while Granny spun the white soft wool, then napped upon her bed. I saw so many faces now gone still near today. Oh, what a glorious time I spent along life's memory way. Anyhow, that was my beginning. And in that time, of course, like I said, the CCUB was still active, and part of the holdings were in Saskatchewan. And between the years of 1928 and 1938, the communal lifestyle, the community had paid off $2 million to the mortgage company that they had borrowed the money from, the Sun Life Mortgage Company. And in 1938, with $350,000 left, the property was the Doukhobor property was foreclosed, and for the $350,000 that was left. So many at that end, actually, I have to mention this: the government bought the land back from the mortgage company, and they rented it at a very minimal cost back to the Doukhobors. They had the villages were no longer communal, so they had their old kitchens and stuff, little by little. That's why sometimes you see those villages had more and more buildings and so forth and so forth. But they were, and that is how the Doukhobor stayed on the land, on the old community land. But so in 1941, in fall, although I started school in Bergen, the school was just across the field from us, and it was just a one-room school with, from grade 1 to 8. But in 1941, we moved to Calgary, where my mother's family lived. It was still a Doukhobor community. Many of it was Doukhobor community. And in the spring, and lots of the U.S. Oh yes, when I have to mention this too. When the communal lifestyle, the CCUB, or the Christian Community of Universal Brotherhood, was over, in 1939, the community Doukhobors were organized under the name of the Spiritual Communities of Christ, the USCC, which we have today, still today. In short, it's called the USCC. It's the Union of Spiritual Communities of Christ. So a lot of the members still were in Saskatchewan, where the majority of the communal lifestyle was in the Kootenays and the boundary here in Grand Forks and in the Kootenay area. So many of the Doukhobors then of the USCC faction were moving into this area from Saskatchewan. And it was also wartime, and Saskatchewan was not honoring the conscientious objectors. You either had to go on to work somewhere or into prison. And a lot of them my uncle was one who went to prison. And when he finished his, how many months it was for him to be in prison as a conscientious objector, he came with us to BC. And in BC, members of the USCC, all they had to do was stick as conscientious objectors. All they had to do was put their calls, the boys would bring in their calls, and they would send them. It was arranged that it goes to Ottawa, and if you're a member of the USCC, you were basically exempt from military service.
And
so in 1942,
Anne,
yes,
was your uncle, you said, went to prison?
In Saskatchewan.
Was there a trial though?
Oh, yes, there was. It wasn't, well, yes, there was. I remember my dad went to some of them, yes, because a lot of the boys that weren't members of the USCC, or at that time, were conscientious objectors. The independent Doukhobors, all of them were. And yes, there was trials. And I don't know, Dorothy, do you remember how many months he spent? 6 months?
How many what?
6 months.
I think 6 months.
6 months.
So in March, when we were moving to BC destination Grand Forks, my uncle came along to find a place for my grandmother and grandmother. He was the youngest brother of my mother. He was still single. And so we came by train up to, I have to mention that we came by train to Calgary. And it was okay because you're going to the prairies. I've been on trains and on prairies all my life, so that was okay. Once we got to Calgary, I don't even know why we took a bus. And going through the mountain roads on the bus for a kid from Saskatchewan was rather,
You were scared.
yes. And we got, the only thing I remember is the ferry ride from Preston to Balfour. And believe it or not, it was still the big wheel behind that was, I guess it was still steam engine, maybe, because they had it's a relic standing there in Balfour now, big wheel powering us through over the water. That was amazing. We came into Nelson and I wasn't impressed. It was overcast, it was raining, the mountains were closed, and I think that's where I got my first case of claustrophobia. I remember how I was I was only 7, but I thought, oh my gosh. And then we spent some time with relatives in the Kootenays, and then we took our train into Grand Forks. We arrived in March, sky was blue, the sun was shining. I looked out and we pulled into the West Grand Forks station, which we had 2 stations then, and I'll explain that. But anyways, we pulled into the West Grand Forks station. There stood my auntie and my cousin smiling up at me, and on a sunny day in this wide valley, and I came home. But I have to explain the way if the train was coming from the east to the west, it would pull into the West Grand Forks station, which is now the station pub and restaurant. Whoever got on or got off, and then it would pull over to the coal chute, which is on the coal chute road. Does anybody know where coal chute road is? And there was coal there and there was water, so it would fill up with water and it would fill up with the coal. Then it would back into the city station, which is where the boundary wall is. It would back into here. It would do whatever it had to do, and it would cross over Market Street. If it was a freight train, it would cross over Market Street, where the building is, Suffolk College building, I think it is, by the park. All the way across there, we had the rails in there, and then it would pull forward and leave the valley, heading west that way. Then the train from the east going west would come in first at the Grand Forks station. This was the Grand Forks station, that was the West Grand Forks station. Originally it was Columbia, I imagine. I think if I remember correctly. Anyhow, it would come into Grand Forks, into the city. I got scared. I just wanted to fall.
There was a train backing up.
Yeah. Anyway, it would head first to the city station. Then it would back up, fill up with coal and water, and come into the West Grand Forks station. And then it would head out of the valley. And you know, we spent a lot of our Sunday afternoons were spent just coming to a station and seeing who's coming on, who's coming off. And there was Donaldson's, in West Grand Forks, there's a Donaldson store, which is where Flex's is now, that corner kind of. And it was the West Grand Forks post office. And the address was West Grand Forks. One was Grand Forks, one was West Grand Forks. And of course, you know, you go in there, you get an ice cream cone or something, and after you spent, that was what.
Can I ask you back up just a moment? You said the ferry from Creston to Balfour, did they actually go from the bottom of the lake up to Balfour?
Pardon me?
When you said that coming on the ferry to Balfour,
From Creston.
It was from Creston, from the bottom of the lake?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
There's still a ferry there, but that one was
Yes.
steam. It had a big wheel in the back. Paddle wheel, I guess, whatever they call it.
Yeah, because the one that's there today just goes right across the short part of the lake, and then
Yeah.
go the bottom of the lake to the top, so thank you.
There was no, this is the new highway we have now through Sudbury and into Creston. That wasn't there. In fact, to go to the Kootenays, you had to go through the states
Yeah.
till this highway was built.
For the
Are you sure?
Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa Mountain. Oh my goodness,
Santa
really?
Rosa.
Yeah.
Yes, Santa Rosa was trenching the buses with.
Yeah, they
But
did.
they would make a corner, they'd go forward, back up, go forward, back
Yeah,
up.
to make
That was a shaky trend. I've been on that one too. Now, where was I?
I wanted to ask you one question.
Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Did a lot of people leave during the war because of the being conscientious objectors? Is that why a lot of people came here to Grand Forks? To BC?
No, the main,
What was the main?
I'd have to go back to when the Doukhobors arrived in 1899. They settled in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And they took the lands were free and they worked them communally. They had them all in common by 1906, I think they had about 57 villages built. And land was developed. The Saskatchewan government then decided that in order to keep the lands, you have to swear allegiance to the crown
Okay.
and take the land individually.
Okay.
And didn't plan on going there, but I will. And so about 1,500 Doukhobors did agree to do that, and they became the independent Doukhobors.
Okay.
And the community Doukhobors, which was all of about 6,000, because about 7,500 came, maybe even more. They came to be in British Columbia. They bought the lands outright by taking the mortgage with the Sun Life Company to bypass the allegiance, swearing the allegiance of the crown, and bought the lands in the boundary area and the community area, and began to build the community lifestyle. And actually, when it was foreclosed, for $350,000, the community was still worth over $7 million. Because there was brick plants, and somebody said to me the other day, 18 sawmills and canneries and all kinds of good stuff. Yes?
I just wanted to add something to that, so that people know that the Doukhobors were asked to come to develop the land because it was all called the Northwest, whatever territory, some of it. So they had all this promise from Queen Victoria that they could live communally and that they wouldn't have to serve in military service. So that was probably the first promise that the government broke to the Doukhobors.
It was definitely a bit of the Doukhobors came from a great deal of persecution by the governments, by the Tsarist governments, regimes of Russia. So you have to understand, they didn't know the language, they didn't understand the system. They were, and whether they were promised and what they were promised, they just assumed that this is what, and the British and American Quakers and Leo Tolstoy were the ones that had made sure that they were able to move to Canada. So, yeah, it was a bit of a, but they moved here, and in order to buy, this is how they got involved with the mortgages, and how in the end, the mortgage company, it was, don't forget, in the 1930s, it was depression, and yet within the depression, they had paid off $1 million. And yet, but that's where we're, oh, where am I now? Where did
You're saying you were going to the
railway
station to see the people.
It was the wartime, and we were lived in a big house actually with my uncle, whether he was renting it or bought it, I'm not renting up on the mountain over there. There's a new home there now. And I have to mention this, that from there we could see the city, and we had a searchlight going all over the valley in the time of war. And there was siren would go off, and we'd have to put all the lights blackout. It was practiced. We had to practice that. So from there we could see that. It was also a seed-growing country. We had carrot seeds. We were growing here in Grand Forks, and potatoes and onion seeds. And we didn't have deer looking in our windows. We had bulbs from Holland, that acres of tulips and gladiolas blooming here. And actually, for all the time I lived on Carson Road, and I think just from a distance I saw some deer once, which was a novelty. But anyway, my dad got a job on Carson Road with Mr. Markel. He was a seed-growing farmer, and we had a house, and I think we had even electricity there too.
Absolutely.
And a porch, back porch, and a front porch, and we had 5 rooms. And the house is still standing there. The porches are gone, but the house is still there. And I was then bused in to the city school. There it is, right there by my husband. Into the city school, yes. And it was a novelty. I mean, this was new because I went to I was in 2 country schools with just from 1 to 8 in one room. And here we had grade 1. I was finishing grade 1, and it was all just grade 1. And I went to school there for, till after the new school was being built, the high school, and I spent part of, if anybody was in my class, I spent part of grade 7 there and grade 8. I loved school, and Ted wanted to know about my writing. At that point in time, my teachers thought I had, I guess that I was excelled more in art, and even recommended that to my parents in my report card that I should be sent on to art school. But I had already started to write early in my life, and I was writing poetry, but I was very, very shy of my writing. And I just read the other day somewhere that poets aren't made, they're born. Because it keeps coming out of you. And I used to write, like where did this all come from? And it was much later in life that, but then of course I started writing into papers. I had columns with Boundary News, and I became, but my poetry was also I was a little shy because when it came through, it comes through from your very soul, and you're almost shy sometimes of sharing it. And sometimes you write it and think, ooh, where did that come from? You know, like you're almost not sure how it got there. And when I heard one time that when I published a poem in the Easter, which I did a lot of my published in the USCC magazine or paper, it was it weekly for a while, or was it out?
Twice. It was twice monthly.
Yeah, it was bi-weekly. Now it's once a month. But I even heard somebody say she didn't write that. I guess I didn't look very smart, so she couldn't write that. And I was told that maybe I better not. But then I began to read a lot, and this was later in my life when I picked up Leo Buscaglia's books, and I have them all. And in one of them he said that when we die, we're not going to be asked what we did or we didn't do, because frankly, God knows what we did. But he said, when we're born, we're given a talent. And if we don't, when we use it, we sort of share it and give it back. And he said, he'll ask us, I gave you a talent and you didn't use it. And very strangely, it opened up a floodgate of writing that I never knew I could do. And I was no longer shy. I always felt like it was a gift. It wasn't mine. And so, and in that case, it became very interesting because I was able to do an awful lot of, having opportunities to do a lot of things, like I wrote 3 scripts. Well, I did a lot of script writing just for fun. I mean, in the USCC stage productions, with the women especially, we had lots of fun. But I did 3 serious productions of one in '87, which was the Doukhobor pageant. I wrote and directed, and there was, of course, the Doukhobor choirs with it. And in '95, I was asked to do the dramatic portion of and with the Voices for Peace tour. And we toured, the one performance we started in Vancouver at the Vogue Theatre, across in the Kootenays and Boundary area, and across Saskatchewan, into Ontario, to Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and all the way into New York, which we did a short. We had a short version. We had 3 acts for the whole full, short act, 1 act to sort of encompass the whole 3 acts. And then we took it all the way across the waters to Russia. Did about 4 performances there. And in 1999, that was to celebrate the 100 years of the burning of weapons of our forefathers in Russia. That was caused to bring us here. That was the reason why we ended up in Canada, because of the persecution that our forefathers were receiving there. And in 1999, we did a small production. I was asked to do a small production, which we put it on in Kelowna and in Berlin Cultural Center, which was called, it was 100 years of the arrival of the Doukhobors in Canada, and we did the Spirit Wrestlers. That's besides the columns that I still write occasionally into Istra, A View from Annie's Window, and the little that I have placed that has been published. But my book, of course, I have to go into now because it's very Grand Forks, very Boundary Kootenay. It was published by the Birch Publishing Company, which is established here in Grand Forks, by a born and bred Doukhobor citizen of Grand Forks. The cover was created by Johnny Kalmikoff, who was born and raised in Grand Forks. He lives now in Castlegar. He's an artist. And it was printed in Trail by the Wall Printing Company. So it's very, very much one that belongs here. Local, yes. Thank you, Cecil. Anyhow, I love school, but I had to leave when I passed into grade 9. I had to leave and go and work on the seed farms. And actually, the following year, in the fall or the summer, I was able to get a job with the first overweighty that opened up in Grand Forks. And it was where the Copycat is, in the Davis Block. There was a style center there, and right beside it on the corner was the overweighty. I was the only employee besides the manager. Can you imagine the improvement? And there was just the one checkout counter, and when a young man would come in to be trained for managing, I would go and work with Mr. Pierce. Gave me a job with the style center next door. So I kind of had I worked in other retail stores after I was married, but that was my beginning of after I left school. And I didn't want to leave school. I wanted to go on because I really love education. I think it's enlightenment, and I enjoyed my school. And I remember we were leaving, the principal, lots of children were leaving after they passed to grade 9. Not all of us, some of us were too poor to go on, and we had to work and help. And so the principal came and said to us, these words I will not forget because it made me feel a lot better. He says, school is just an introduction to knowledge. Knowledge begins when you leave school and you start living. And I remember that, and I find it to be very true. Because truly, that is what life is all about. It teaches you more than any school can ever teach you. Does anybody have any? I'm going to do some, maybe I should mention this. When I was 16, since it's Annie's story, Lisa. When I was 16, I was critically ill, And I was losing the use of, I was still working for a lady, and I was losing the use of my legs. And in Trail, they told the doctors in the old Trail Hospital and the clinic there, then they diagnosed me, and they diagnosed me correctly that I had a spinal cord tumor. And in those days, there was no place, and they told my parents not to waste time or money in Canada because there was any help for me at all. And they told me this, actually, I was only 16 when they were telling me this, that there would be no help for me here in Canada, that if I was to have any help at all, it would be at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Well, they might as well have told me to go to the moon because we didn't have really the money. But I'm mentioning this because the community really rallied, and especially the USCC people. And at that time, $10 was a lot. And I remember when my parents were going to sell the farm, and I really didn't want them to do that because I knew how critical I was and whether it was worth selling it or not, I wasn't sure. But the community rallied, and if somebody remembers Leo Mills, not remembering him here, he had a friend in Spokane working for the railway station there. He was in some position there. And he got us, because I was not walking already, I was bedridden, so to get me there, I had to have a roomette. It was a fast train, I forgot what it was called. Something cheap.
Milwaukee Road.
Huh?
Milwaukee Road.
Anyway, it was a fast train, it didn't stop at every station. And with the help of the community, and with Leo Mills asking that I got the roomette for half price, and when I got there by car, they weren't able to get me off, so they had to get an ambulance to lift me out to carry me onto the onto the train. And even that was half price. So on my 17th birthday, exactly, I was being operated on for a spinal cord tumor in St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. And there was a lot of doctors there, and on the 7th day I began to walk, and there was a lot of doctors there being trained from all over the world at that time, and I guess maybe even now. And they came to check me out. My recovery was remarkable, and they couldn't get over how strong I was. And there was 5 of us in the ward, 4 other women with me. And finally, there was about 8 doctors around my bed checking my strength and the way my arms and legs are moving. And they asked me, what do they feed you in Canada with? And for a minute, I was stunned. I thought, well, I don't know. I thought of borscht. I thought, cabbage. And they started laughing, and the girls in the bed said, don't laugh. She's a vegetarian. And believe it or not, they all put it down in their little notebooks. And I thought, whoa, wow. And anyway, when I came out, we had to stay a little longer. My dad came with us, but because I was bedridden and I was already 16, my sister came along to help out, and we had to stay a little longer, so we were able to, well, things were fairly cheap then, but money was scarce too. But anyhow, I had to have 10 deep X-ray radiation treatments. And finally we came home, and before I left, because of the help that was coming, and money was just coming from everywhere, from everybody, I even would get letters and money was in there. And I told my mother, actually, I promised her I would come back and I would be walking, and I was. So I'm gonna move fast forward here. I don't know what time I have, but in 6 months, when I got back, 6 months, I was back in overweighting. At 18, I was 17 when the operation. At 18 and a half, I was getting married. because of the X-ray treatments, the deep radiation, they weren't sure I'd be able to have children. I moved out of the water just before I was 20. I was a mother. By 28, I lived fast and furious. By 28, I had my third daughter. At 38, by 38, I was a mother-in-law. At 39, I was a grandmother.
Wow. And when did you and Mary and them have parties?
Pardon me?
I heard about all the parties you used to have with Mary and them.
Oh,
Dancing under the broom and stuff.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, darling. My case was transferred to a Mayo-trained doctor in Spokane. He was a neurosurgeon. And I had to go there often, and Dr. Purley made sure I did. And anything went wrong, here I'm gone with the bag of whatever, x-rays and stuff. And one day I said to Dr. Lapp, after 15 years I got to know him well, and I said, Dr. Lapp, I feel I'm such a wreck. What am I going to be like when I'm 40? And he looked at me and he says, you may not live to be 30. And I was only in my 20s then. And if you live to be 40, you'll be in a wheelchair. And I'm still fighting the wheelchair, though I have a cane. I'm still fighting that. So when I was told that, I did live fast and furious. And at every birth he was a gift.
Yeah.
And I have to say this, that in December, my husband and I have celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. But when we were getting married, some people thought we'd never make it for 2 weeks. And I was, of course, a year and a half after my major surgery. I wasn't that well, and a lot of people were telling him and my mother-in-law, my poor little mother-in-law, that she's not really very well, like, well, he shouldn't be marrying her. But knowing my husband today, I think he probably said, she dies, she dies. So here we are, and today we have our children, and we have 5 grandchildren, and 3 beautiful great-grandsons. And occasionally when I tell my husband, like, what? I mean, like with the prognosis and the grim prognosis and stuff the doctor was giving me, I thought, well, just a minute, what did we do to deserve this? What did I do to deserve this? As he'd always say, without even a thought, only the good die young. Anyhow, in the 1960s, the Doukhobor lands were surveyed. We lived in the village up to this time. When we moved here, back and forth to other places, but
Which village did you live in?
Huh?
Which village did you live in?
It was right by the highway, number 3 highway behind Rilkoff store. There's a little pull out there now for trucks.
So which name was it?
Kulikoka.
Okay. So
But those were nicknames. Those were Doukhobor would name some, like London Village was called because it had a big trestle going, the big London.
Yeah.
That was London Village. So they were but we were called Kulikoka. Kulikoka is a long, big word, and somewhere somebody had a long nose, and that's right. So it was a perfect place to have built, to have the city by it. But the lands were, anyways, in the 1960s, the Doukhobor lands, the old communal lifestyle lands were surveyed. The sealed water was brought in. And the government sold it back to the Doukhobors at a very minimal price. Maybe we have to say the good stuff, because that was good stuff. And it was some of them was 5 acres. And it was sold back to the USCC, and a lot of the USCC members were living even across the river in the valleys, like in Allen Gardens, and after they called it the colony people, the one that lived in the homes that they bought the lands. If there was any land left over, they were allowed to buy also. Excuse me. And so I think we originally wanted to buy them in common, didn't we? Under the umbrella of USCC. We were not allowed, but we did get that we had to have our individual needs to the land. Anyhow, I think it was 1966 that I moved into a home that finally had hot and cold water and indoor plumbing. By then, of course, my youngest was 3 years old. I had brought up my children still rather, it wasn't easy. It wasn't always easy, but it was okay. So anyway, and that's my story. I moved fast forward. We've been married 60 years and a lot of life, but the time is running short, and I'm just wondering if there's any more questions.
What's the name of your book?
With each bend in the road.
Pardon? I can't see. What's the
Can I
name?
pass it around?
With the,
With each bend of the road.
In the road.
With each bend in the road.
And if there's no questions, I would like to end with one more of my poems, if you don't mind.
I'm just curious,
Yes.
your schooling, how far did you go through school?
How far I passed to grade 9 and had to quit, but when my youngest daughter was graduating, I went back I took the course and took a few lessons from Suffolk College and received my GED
Okay.
before my youngest daughter graduated.
So where did you go to school?
I went to school to the city school in Grand Forks.
Okay.
I lived here all my life. When I moved here in 42, I don't think that's where I plan to stay.
So you didn't go to Fructova or anything?
No, I wasn't. My husband was to Fruitova, but I didn't even at first even know much about Fruitova. When it closed down, some of the Fruitova people would come on the bus with us. I lived on Carson Road and in Almond Gardens,
So
I was picked
distance.
up by the bus.
Yeah.
I had bus service, the school bus service. So I didn't have to go. There was several Doukhobor children going to the city school too.
And you were saying that Dr. Purley was your doctor?
Pardon
Was
me?
it Dr. Purley that was your doctor?
He was my doctor since I was 11 years old.
Okay. I've heard about
And
him.
I had all my 3 children born with Dr. Purley. Absolutely. And he saw me through thick and thin. And after I came back from Rochester, he looked after me very well. Like I said, every little thing goes wrong, off to Spokane, just to make sure everything was doing well.
Oh,
And he did house calls. And he made house calls.
well, they all did.
We had 2 doctors in the whole valley, and they made house calls at night. If one of my children were ill, here they were. I even said the children were born at home. My nephew, my eldest nephew, my eldest nephew was born at home, and he came and helped to.
My son was born with Dr.
Yeah,
Purley.
that's my sister.
So, but my husband and Dr. Purley were in the same school trustee kind of thing, and he was a friend of the family
It's a big difference from today, isn't it?
until he passed
Oh, he was
away.
our founding doctor. Definitely. It was all a different. I actually mourned the gray stone hospital that just was built here across the road. And there was Dr. Truex's house right beside it. I don't think Grand Forks should have ever got rid of that, nor the beautiful school that I went to. I think it should have been preserved, because in our travels with my husband, we've been to Prince Edward Island, for instance. There's buildings there for 250 years old and they're still standing. Looked after, maintained. So I thought I really wanted them. And like I said, the museum, if it was to be built, should. And I remember Leo Mills telling me, Annie, buy the village and make it into a museum. And I said, like, we have been dealing with arson for so long that we would be afraid to do that. But the city shouldn't. The city shouldn't. I really didn't know if it was a good thing for me to buy something and make an enterprise out of it. That was, a Doukhobor way of life sort of thing. But I really believe that the city should have bought, or somebody in the country should have bought it and made, because it was right on the highway. And even where the Fruitova School is now, there was 2 beautiful Doukhobor buildings right there. It was also a village. And it would have made just a fantastic museum. But there wasn't the foresight there, maybe, I suppose.
It's unfortunate.
So is there any more questions?
When you were in school, so you were some Doukhobor people, some local Grand Forks, non-Doukhobor people. Was there?
You have to talk louder.
Sorry, was there when you were in school? Was there acceptance of like the Doukhobor people and the non-Doukhobor people in Grand Forks? Was there a good community between the two? Or?
I started school here in the city school. There was very few of us Doukhobors, but most of the Saskatchewan children that families that came ended up in nursery and in Almond Gardens on Carson Road. And so a lot of us came there, but it wasn't like a lot of us. And we were, at the time of the war, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but we were never mistreated. I personally have no hard feelings at all, except that we were taught to be very compassionate and tolerant of families that were suffering. And and I have friends whose families were, brothers and fathers were, but actually even in the time of the communal lifestyle, when the First World War was on, and I don't know if any remember Mrs. Ryzantsev, Luba Ryzantsev, she lived here in town, and she was telling us the story that Peter Lordy Berrigan would not allow the children to have berries, to pick the berries, but not to eat them, and then deliver them to the neighbors whose families whose fathers and brothers and sons were at war, as a gift of compassion. There was we had the down factories at that time, and I think there was two shiploads, I think, that were sent across to Europe for the children of war-torn countries. So there was always a conscious objector is something that you evolve into, I guess. And there was others. Like I think the Jehovah's Witnesses were conscientious objectors. And there was other people.
The Quakers, yeah.
And Canada did honor it. Although, like I said, I don't know what other province didn't. And even I don't know how the other conscientious objectors were treated in BC. I only know that the USCC members were very fortunate in that respect, that there was an agreement made with Ottawa that they would just be put them together, send them back, and they were accepted. But, yes.
And did you speak any English before you went to school? Because I'm older than you, and I didn't speak any English.
You know, darling, I had already an older sister, brother that went to English school. And when I started school in Bergen, it was one-room school with 1 to 8. The majority were Doukhobor children. We were very close to the teachers there. They came to visit us because we lived almost next door to the school. But because all the children in the yard, I was the youngest of the cousins and my siblings, they did know some English, and I did know some. And when we moved to Calmer, and it was also the same kind of country school, and there was even Aboriginal children, First Nation children there, but there was also a lot of the Doukhobor children were there, because it was a strong Doukhobor community, and I didn't have that trouble. When my youngest daughter was going to school, because of the grandmas and the grandpas, and we talked in Russian at home, when my oldest daughter was going to school, I had to teach her English before she entered school. They went to the city schools. Where my second daughter over here, already, because the older sister was already speaking it, Elizabeth didn't have the trouble that some children have.
So when you were in school, I'm just curious, did the non-Doukhobor and the Doukhobor kids get along better than the adults, or worse than the adults?
I think children always get along better. I remember the Japanese were sent from the coast into the interior here. And when we lived, well, actually from Markel's, my dad got a job at where the Broadacres is now. It was Pete Jefferson's farm. It was larger. The house was larger. And in our yard, right beside us, was a house built that my cows were sent in. Japanese family was sent in, and I became very close with them. With the girls, there was the younger girl, but particularly Kanuko, who was selling my cow. Maybe you remember her, Jean. She and I were very close, and the war was raging. And one day, my dad and mom came home and we were sleeping in my bed together. I was very, very blonde, and she was, of course, Japanese oriented. He looked and he shook his head and says, like people, like even Jesus said, people should live like children. Mm-hmm. And he said, look at that. Just look at that. And he was Cecil's dad and my dad were building the new high school, and his uncle. And my dad said often he would look down, because there was a lot of Doukhobors and Japanese then, and all nationalities going to school. And they look off the roof sometimes, and the way we intermixed. And everybody was everybody. And nobody, I never had any trouble. I myself felt different, simply because my parents didn't speak English. They still wore the Russian outfits. They dressed differently. They spoke differently. But we weren't alone. There was a lot of that. This was like big percentage of the valley was Doukhobor. And it didn't give us, but I had a lot of friends that were of different nationalities and got along with my teachers. They were always respectful. Talked with them like I'm talking today. If they had questions, I answered. But, there was things we couldn't do or shouldn't do, and it was hard. I remember, I'll even say this, when I was in grade 8, the teacher walked up to me and says, you're you're good in school, and I'd like you to even go on. But the superintendent is going to come in, and he's going to be and we walked out into the hallways to sing, "O Canada, and God Save the King, Queen." It was already the Queen. And he says, he's going to be here, and I would really like you to stand up and sing if you can. Because we were brought up to have only allegiance to God. And please tell all your friends. So of course we talked, and you're young enough to be a little bit afraid. Mm-hmm. And you're broken up, and you don't know which way to go. And I remember where you stood at attention. I asked everybody, if you're not going to sing, stand at attention. All the Doukhobor friends in my class. And this is what we did. But the heart was beating because you were going to be expelled. They told us, if you don't, you're going to be expelled. And when you like school, you want to go on. Of course, it was hard. But it wasn't as hard as it was for our forefathers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing this, for sharing
But
your
anyways,
past.
can I just share one more poem before I go?
Yes.
Have I got time?
Yes.
This whole time, this was written. This is written different from the first one. That one I wrote a while back. This one was written actually while the book was being assembled and being already edited, and some of the poetry came out to be that. And this kind of encompasses what I have just been talking about, or my life in general. It's called Life, a Fleeting Moment. Just yesterday I walked the paths of childhood. Youth was mine. Just yesterday, or so it seems, I experienced the pangs of puppy love and daydreams. They said it was infatuation, but it felt fine. Then suddenly discovering true love and much, much more, a revelation like the opening of a door, came marriage and the precious moments of motherhood, fulfilled with babes in arms. A strong and deep emotion which felt so good. Just yesterday, life was filled with hopes and dreams. Just yesterday, life Occasionally, just yesterday, life was filled with hopes and dreams, the exciting rise to mountaintops, and occasionally the despair and depth of dark low valleys. Life never stops. The world keeps turning with motion and emotion. Just yesterday, youth was all mine. It lay before me with years to spare, to live, to love, to dare, to use and sometimes to abuse, as if in endless rhyme of time. Then suddenly the years began to slip away like shadows in the night. No longer mine for me to taste, anticipate the youthful spring of energy and might, as if a gradual closing of a door, mine no more. And yet some days my aged soul feels overwhelmed and swells up like a rising tide down deep inside where memories dwell. The spirit soars and speaks to me of love and joy and a heart so filled and blissfully content, not spent. Of moments gone yet constantly relived. The yesterdays seem never really far away, for they are mine to savor each and every day, to hold, to reminisce, to keep, because the dreams of yesterday live on and can't be stored away. They are the blood that flows within the veins that then and now are finely meshed like grains, all part of who we are, a fleeting moment yet eternal, like the twinkling of a star. Thank you. And thank you for asking.
Well, thank you, Anne.
And Dosh. If it wasn't for Dosh, I don't know if you'd get me.
No, probably not.
Good to have connections. Good neighbors.
And on behalf of the Art Gallery or Gallery 2, I'd like to, you expressed interest in having that book.
Oh,
Please accept it as art today.
Thank you. I need to buy it. Thank you so much.
And thanks, Wes, again for filming this on behalf of the Historical Society too, because it's great that we can record this and keep it in the archives and keep your story alive.
Well, I told him we'll have to check and see if it's worth anything.
Well, you sure weren't shy, that's good.
Oh, Are you kidding?